So, welcome everybody. I think we're about ready to start, if that's okay. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Dido Harding, Chair of NHS Improvement, and I'm joined by an alternative David job share partner. I'm told to say a more good-looking, younger version.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. It's very unusual. I get complimented at AGMs, I have to say. So my name is David Roberts. I'm the Deputy Chair of NHS England and also an Associate Director of NHS Improvement. David Pryor sends his sincere apologies, but he has been called to number 10. We can speculate it's actually about life sciences. So before everything goes off and gets too, the rumour mill starts too much about his future intentions, it's about life sciences. So, but he sends his sincere apologies, and I am a not very good substitute, but we'll try hard.
So the two of us are going to hand over the job of actually chairing our AGM in just a second to Richard Vyse, who's going to be sort of master of ceremonies. And as I just say, welcome everyone and look forward to people's questions and comments later. Thanks very much.
Thank you. So thank you so much for taking the trouble to come to the AGM at the end of a long and hopefully inspiring and interesting day. So this is the formal occasion when you get the chance to hear the NHS executive team account for their activities during the year. Today, as well as hearing the financial accounts as you would expect, we're also going to hear updates on the people plan and the long-term plan. And there'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions towards the end. And as well as the people who are speaking, there's pretty much a full house of the executive team and non-executive directors here, and they'll be brought into the conversation as appropriate to answer your questions. So the order of play is going to be that Chief Executive Simon Stevens is going to make his opening speech. Then Julian Kelly, the Chief Financial Officer, will be making the annual report and accounts for NHS England. Matt Tagney, Director of Planning, will give an update on the NHS long-term plan and how the implementation is going. Then Perena Issar, the Chief People Officer, will give an update on the NHS People Agenda, which has just been really front and centre of so many discussions already today. And then we'll have a chance for some Q&A. So Simon, can I introduce you? I'll see you to speak. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Richard, and thanks everybody who's here. I was just saying to Julian Kelly, in previous years, Paul Bowman has delivered the finance report, which he's done with not only great aplomb, but tremendous wit. And so, Julian, you know what is expected. But really, the key points today, I think, will be from Perena Issar, our new Chief People Officer, because as we have all recognised, the single biggest thing that the health service has now got to get right is workforce support, not only for new people coming in to join us, but also for those who are currently looking after patients, the 1.3 million people looking after 1.5 million people every 24 hours. But the point of an AGM is, of course, to look back as well as to look forward. And in the annual reports of both NHS England and NHS Improvement, we set out what we think is an unvarnished assessment of the pressures as well as the progress over the last year. And this is the first time that NHS England and NHS Improvement have been holding a joint annual general meeting. And the reason that's important is, of course, because it signals the bigger change that we are embarked on as we bring these two organisations together, recognising that across the health service, the programme of change, which people are now working on up and down the country, is all about joining up GP services, primary care services, hospital services, mental health services, social care services, and work with the third sector and local authorities and social care. And we've got to be the change we want to see. So we have, over the course of the last year, brought together working at board level, at executive level, at regional level, and for a lot of our staff, some of whom may be watching on the live screen this afternoon, we have to recognise that this has been a time of great uncertainty and considerable personal disruption. We are, as part of this change process, taking out 20% of our running costs, which will be reinvested in frontline patient care. That means that a lot of our staff across NHS England and NHS Improvement right now are affected by this organisational change programme. So on behalf of both organisations and both boards, I want to thank the staff of NHS England and NHS Improvement for everything they have done over the last year, for everything that we are embarked on for the year ahead, but also, quite frankly, for the next 3 or 4 months, which we recognise are going to be a period when not only are we completing this internal change process, but we are providing the national and regional backbone for the Brexit readiness teams. We are ensuring that the NHS is geared up for winter. We are dealing with the operational realities of the here and now, and we are supporting local areas across the country in finalising their own implementation plans for the long-term plan. So an enormous range of pressures on a very talented group of people across NHS England and NHS Improvement. An enormous thank you to them all. Now, of course, the context has changed quite a bit since we were here this time last year. We had, last September, received the NHS 5-year funding settlement that had been negotiated with government in the run-up to July 5th and the celebration of the 70th anniversary of the NHS, but we had not at that point set out the route map for the next 5 and 10 years in the form of the long-term plan. And as we report in the annual overview from both NHSE and I over the last year, we've continued to see strong patient satisfaction with general practice, the linchpin, the front end of the NHS, despite rising concern on the part of GPs about workload and workforce pressures, and on the part of patients about ability to speedily access appointments. We saw, for the first time, more than 2 million cancer checkups being performed, with a 15% increase last year alone as part of our move towards earlier diagnosis to improve survival rates. 1.4 million people were referred to NHS mental health therapy services last year. Another 800,000 people were seen in A&E within 4 hours, and 500,000 people extra got planned waiting list treatment. And underpinning that, the 50,000 scientists working across the health service, because it's not just nurses and doctors and therapists, enabled us, with our partners, to sequence the 100,000th genome in December. All of this at a time that was the culmination of multi-year financial restraint across the public service, including the NHS, and at a time when the Office of National Statistics reported independently that NHS productivity had been growing by 3% a year, 3 times faster than the rest of the economy. So we not only have a good value health service, one of the most efficient in the world, we have a productivity rate in the NHS that is improving far faster than the rest of the UK economy, all of which gives us confidence that the NHS can be wise stewards of the extra investment that the taxpayers of this country will be putting at our disposal in the years ahead. So as we now look forward to what next year and the year after and the year after that will bring, we know that the big changes that we've tested now in a number of parts of the country through the vanguards, the integrated care, they now need to become the new normal in every part of the country. And so the way in which NHS England and NHS Improvement will support local hospitals and mental health services, community services, GP, social care, do that will be absolutely critical for our success. We want to help people stay healthier. We want to have a renewed focus on health inequalities. We want to back that for the first time with a funding guarantee, that the funding going into primary care services, community and mental health services will grow faster than the overall growth in the NHS budget, so they will get more of the expanding share. We want to use the opportunity of digital and technology to free up time on the part of frontline staff and to make it easier for patients to interact with the NHS. And one of the touchstones of that will be our success over the next 5 years in eradicating the need for perhaps 30 million outpatient appointments, so people will be able to get specialist advice and expertise without having to trog off to the outpatients department with all of the inconvenience that causes. And as we do that, we want to make sure that we take a very focused look at some of the areas where, frankly, the NHS offer has not been good enough in the past. And learning disability and autism would be front and centre there. There are a number of other areas where you will see renewed effort on the part of the combined NHS England and NHS improvement over the decade ahead. Finally, as I said at the service at Westminster Abbey on the 5th of July last year, the great thing about the NHS is that it commands the support of the whole country, and rightly so. But the NHS is always changing. And I referenced the quote that Aneurin Bevan used 7 decades back when he said, quote, "The NHS must always be changing, growing and evolving so that it must always appear to be inadequate." And that is the paradox that we deal with. The debate on the NHS is always pointing out where we need to do better, while nevertheless recognising that the excellence of care is widespread. And managing that tension between celebrating the great and challenging for the future is what our organisations are all about, with the support of the 1.3 million people who are devoting their professional lives to doing so. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Simon. I'd now like to invite Julian Kelly to present the annual reports as Chief Financial Officer. Julian, over to you.
Can I just ask, how do I click on for the slide? Right, that'll do it. So I'm going to present the actually someone else's results, and just as Simon said, you know, the challenge is to live up to Paul's wit. Well, no doubt I'll fall short of that. And as we look on the results, actually I have to say it's been an extraordinary result that my predecessors delivered as well. So let's hope that's also not a challenge I will completely fail on. But let me just show, before I come to NHS England specifically, actually the result that was delivered for the NHS as a whole between NHS England and NHS improvement. And when you look at these numbers, which are expressed in millions, you have to remember that we are basically spending £124 billion. And the bottom line number is that the government, through various sources, having made available £124 million and saying you can't spend any more than that, Paul and Elizabeth, with the whole of the NHS, basically delivered a bottom line result where they got within £345 million of that total. In fact, if you actually allow for a couple of sort of accounting technicalities to do with the way we accounted for the two big Carillion projects that where Carillion collapsed and we sort of had to take them into the NHS, actually they got within £90 million of that total, which, you know, you talk about landing a plane on a pinhead. I don't quite know what we've just landed it on, but I mean, that is an absolutely extraordinary result. Now, the way that that is built up is that frontline commissioners underspent their budget by about £160 million. Again, you're talking about £112 million, and they got within £160 million of that total. Providers had a net deficit, which you include the kind of underlying position of 827 and the effect of the Carillion event, actually a combined position of a deficit of about £570 million. Now, whether, you know, I take the 827 or the 570, actually that is a significantly smaller aggregate deficit than on the previous 4 years. And in aggregate, that was then offset by an underspend on total other NHS England budgets of about £756 million. The NHS England started the year with a plan for a £265 million underspend. That was held as sort of a contingency against planned deficits on the provider side, but to do with some worsening of the planned performance on the provider side, delivered a further £615 million of managed underspend for a total underspend of £916 million. So if I just click on, this is the aggregate spending position for NHS England. laid out here, simply to say that the NHS England lived within all of its spending controls as set out in the NHS mandate. And just a flag from this slide, the administration costs were basically flat on the previous year, and broadly, therefore, we continue to deliver further efficiencies by delivering a real terms reduction in admin spend. So we met all our targets and in aggregate contributed to a balanced position for the whole of the NHS, with a group underspend of £916 million. Before I move into a bit more detail on NHS England, actually I should just reflect capital, which was not talked about in those earlier numbers. On capital, really the big story, I think, in the NHS as a whole was that while NHS England spent about £30 million less than its allocated capital budget, the NHS as a whole spent £3.9 billion. Now, actually, that was more than the amount the NHS had, the department had allocated for it to spend, where it had allocated about it had allocated £3.6 billion. So, in essence, the NHS spent about £370 million more than the department had allocated. The department balanced its aggregate budget, but the reason I flag this is that is actually quite a significant change from previous years, where historically the NHS, in particular acute providers, spent less than the amount of money that was allocated. And I think this is a reflection of the fact that there is considerable pent-up demand for capital spend in the NHS as capital has been constrained over recent years, as we've seen growth in backlog maintenance. But as some NHS providers have actually begun to deliver surpluses, and with the cash support that we have provided, they are now catching up, and you are beginning to see providers spending more capital on key critical requirements. And I just mention that because as we have looked into 2019-20, the government has provided another £1 billion to the NHS in order that it can keep going on dealing with backlog maintenance and on beginning to deliver some of the improvements we need to see in the NHS in general. And I think that will be a developing story as we go through 1920 and indeed as we look forward to future years. In a bit more detail for NHS England, for CCGs, actually they delivered an underlying underspend of about 46 million pounds, 0.2% of their total spending. They had some one-off pressures, which means that overall they were 150 million over against the budget that was set. Those pay pressures were GP pay awards and some residual pressures that ran over from 2017-18, where we were having to pay more for certain drugs than the DH listed price due to supply pressures. But the commissioners managed to deal with most of that, and in fact delivered about 2.9% efficiencies, £2.4 billion, comparable to the previous year, even against a position where they were seeing continued growth, in particular in non-elective demand within the acute sector. And overall, the position for CCGs, I think, shows an underlying improvement. In 2018-19, 33 CCGs missed their budget plans compared to 75 in 2017-18. So an improvement in the underlying spending position of individual CCGs. And as I said before, ongoing good grip and control on admin spend in 2018-19. For direct commissioning, NHS England went into the year with a plan to deliver a sort of 195 million underspend against budget. You know, that was the contingency we were holding, but in fact we did slightly better than that, again showing the improved financial management, commercial grip that the commissioning side has got into specialised commissioning, both on the drugs bill and indeed on the spend through acute providers. And then, as I said before, central budgets underspent by £756 million. There was a couple of £100 billion of planned contingency that was being held, again, against the position on the provider side, but then through strong vacancy control, some one-off benefits from rebates on GP business rates, and actually improvement on the income we get from our activity on dealing with fraud, as well as some necessary decisions to defer some programme expenditure. We managed to deliver that underspend, which, as I said right at the start, meant that we overall balanced across the NHS. However, the world never stops. As Simon said, we're looking ahead. In the long-term plan, the government has set the following 5 key objectives for the NHS in terms of its financial performance. I won't pretend to run through those. You can read the long-term plan in just about every document we now publish, and you will see those headlined. I just thought it worth saying what we've actually done to begin to deliver those as we look forward into 2019-20, where the architecture we've put in place this year still aims to balance the NHS books nationally, actually materially reduce the underlying provider deficit, as well as continue to improve the financial performance of commissioners. And the key changes this year to help to deliver that are that we have put another £1 billion into provider tariffs. We have set, I think, probably more realistic efficiency goals on providers and commissioners, and then set all of our plans with those more realistic efficiency targets. We've reset the controlled totals for providers and commissioners based on their outturn performance through 2017-18 and 2018-19. And there's been a much stronger focus as we went through the planning round on system planning and system working, and greater collaboration between commissioners and providers. And we will continue to bear down on admin costs as we go through this year and into 2021, with an overall reduction of about 20% over those 2 years. So that is looking ahead, and I'm going to end there. That is 200 pages, summarised in about 4 slides. I hope that helps.
Thanks very much, Julian. And I would now like to invite Matt Tagney, the Director of Planning, to update us on the implementation of the NHS long-term plan. Matt.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to address this meeting. My name is Matt Tagney. I'm the Director of Planning for NHS England and NHS Improvement. But for the last year, I've also been the Programme Director for the long-term plan. And what I'm here to do today, very briefly, is just to run you through what we have been doing over the past, since January, to implement the long-term plan and start to turn it into a reality. So as you all know, the plan was published on January the 7th. It built on the direction of travel that we set out in the 5-year forward view. It set out a phased and costed set of policies which the NHS is going to implement over the next 5 and 10 years, which will take a more proactive approach to preventing ill health, a renewed focus on reducing inequalities and reducing variation, continue to bring commissioners and providers and other partners together to work as a system, take the next steps on personalising our healthcare, improving outcomes in key priority areas, and expanding services where we know we have growing demands, for example, mental health. And it will also set out how we will increase the number of staff in the NHS and better support them through investments in technology and other means to deliver these improvements. We'll also continue, as Simon said, to demonstrate that the NHS remains an excellent value for money proposition for the British public. After we published it, we then moved into the next phase was a really early focus on delivering some of the key national enablers that would allow this change to happen. So, for example, the creation of the NHS Assembly, which has brought together over 50 Assembly members selected from over 500 applicants. They had their first meeting in April, and they are advising our boards to ensure we remain connected to the front line as we implement the LTP. I'd also highlight the new GP contract, which was announced at the end of January, and it set out significant additional investment as part of the £4.5 billion a year of additional funding we'll be investing in primary and community care by 23-24. That contract also includes how we will develop primary care networks. And since that has been announced, the network contract has gone live as planned on the 1st of July. We currently have 1,254 primary care networks, which covers 99% of practices in England. And that has been followed throughout the year with a further series of announcements on further enabling activity that will support the NHS to deliver these changes. Following hotly on the heels of that, we also stepped up local engagement on implementation, because as we know, the real changes from the LTP are going to be felt and implemented locally. The long-term plan set out a national plan based on a broad and deep engagement and co-design on where we expect the NHS to be nationally in 5 years. But we wanted to make sure that those local plans were based on an equally strong understanding of the needs and views of local populations. So that's why during the spring we worked with all 152 Health Watch organisations across the country. They in turn worked together within system, STP or ICS footprints to engage 30,000 people. They ran 500 focus groups and almost 1,000 other events, in total bringing together the views of 85,000 people to give us a really solid grounding, a confirmation that the local plans that will be developed are based on those local views as well. We followed that with the publication of the implementation framework, which we published at the end of June. And I think that set out for the NHS an unprecedented level of detail about what we're asking the NHS to deliver over the next 5 years, the funding and support that will be available to the NHS to assist them to do that. And it set out some really clear principles about how we're asking the NHS to implement this change and asking them to ensure that their plans are clinically led, that they are locally owned, that they're based on realistic workforce planning assumptions, that they are financially balanced, deliver the 5 financial tests set by the government that Julian referred to, and that they phase the activity over the full 5 years and do so in a way that responds to the particular local needs and priorities for each system. And we also asked that those plans were developed in close partnership with local authorities and other partners. Fifth thing I would mention is that framework publication gave real impetus to strategic planning by systems. And so every system in the country at the moment is based on their engagement, developing an implementation plan and a local strategic plan. And that will set out how, in the way that, in keeping with the principles that we set out, that will set out how the NHS will implement the changes we described in the long-term plan over the course of the next 5 years. Those plans will be agreed between systems and the NHS England and Improvement Regional Directors by mid-November. And then we will bring those plans together in an aggregation to publish a full implementation plan by the end of the year, which will provide clarity on how these implementation changes will be felt across the NHS over the next 5 years. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'd now like to invite Parena Issar, the Chief People Officer, to update us on the people agenda.
Good afternoon, everybody. I was joking earlier that this is the raciest event at the Expo, but I'm really pleased to be here to speak to you about this, because it shows that people are really interested to know what is happening on all of the issues that we've discussed. And so thank you for your attention. So if I could just step out a little bit. I was sharing with some of my team members that I feel quite lucky to live in a country which has a long-term plan for health, which has a National Health Service to actually implement that plan, where it's not a wish or a dream or a desire. It's a real plan backed by real action and funds. And not many countries, if any, in the world have that. So that's our privilege. And then we have the privilege to actually work out how we're going to make it happen. And one of those elements is the workforce. So what I remind myself every day is we are writing the world's largest, most ambitious workforce strategy. It has never been attempted, and as we look around the world, I don't think any country is in a position to actually try to do that. So that's our responsibility and our privilege. 1.3 million people work in the NHS, and that is the workforce plan that will help us to see that we have the skills, the configuration of roles, the pathways into the NHS that actually help deliver the long-term plan. So let me just move to the next slide. So it's very much, the NHS People Plan is very much part of the long-term plan. As I said, the world's largest and most ambitious workforce plan for the 1.3 million people. And the way it's been created so far, we had an interim plan that was published in June, and David and Dido had led a very inclusive, very collaborative process with a big tent. And just to share that the big tent has 350 listed stakeholders as being engaged in this process. That's 350 entities, not individuals. I mean, there's a lot more people who are involved in that across the sector and across the country. So 350 entities have been involved in creating the interim plan and continue to be involved. I've been really inspired by the kind of passion people have for creating a different future and making sure that we have the workforce to take us 10, 15 years down the line. As we know, some of the lead times for, let's say, creating a doctor are 10 to 15 years. So we need to, creating a consultant. So we need to really be thinking, 5, 10, 15 years ahead. One of the other observations I have is that workforce has been extremely fragmented over the years. It's become, in the last 10 years, I would say, the responsibilities for workforce have become fragmented over different entities and some responsibilities that actually don't sit anywhere. And what the People Plan does is that it aligns us all to a strategic direction and a plan, so that no matter what our organizational boundaries are, we all have a role, and that role will be quite clear and measurable in terms of what we are contributing to that People Plan. So whatever the fragmentation around organizational boundaries, this plan and workforce strategy is going to help us get much more aligned and focused. So I wanted to take you briefly through the 5 priority areas that we're working on at the moment. Each work stream, and we have lots of very, very capable people working on each of the work streams. Let me not move away from the mic. They are working right now on high impact actions, and I've listed some of them here. And what that means is really, where should we be placing our bets? What are the choices and trade-offs that we need to make? What can we invest in and what can we not invest in? So currently the stage at which we are is about identifying those high impact actions. A few weeks later, we will then be prioritizing amongst those high impact actions, costing them and seeing what is the kind of impact these actions will make on the outcomes we want to have. So I won't go through all of this. I don't have the time, sorry. But I will pick up one from each of the work streams. So from the Making the NHS a Better Place to Work, which is the #1 priority outlined in the People Plan. And actually that got a very positive feedback from people saying, if we're making it #1, it really, it shows the focus that we're putting on culture and place to work. The high impact action here is the new offer for staff. And it encompasses some of the other things already outlined there about reducing bullying and harassment, violence and sickness absence. But we know that reducing or eliminating, as we should, bullying and harassment doesn't make it a great place to work. Just that's the minimum that we should expect. So to make it a great place to work, we're engaging with people across the service to say what would make it a great place to work for you. And we will need to then deliver on that core offer. So for instance, flexible working has consistently come out as one of the top elements of making the NHS a great place to work. To be able to balance your family and caring commitments, and to know in advance in some cases, and in other cases to be able to change it at short notice as well. So you'll see that we are investing in e-rostering to be able to do that. This engagement will make sure that it's a two-way conversation and not something that somebody decides in an office and says, this is the offer we're making to you. So that's the key high impact action in the first priority, making the NHS a best place to work. The second one is improving our leadership culture. Leaders have a large shadow and impact on any organization or team that they lead. And the NHS is no different. Incredible leaders, but also a large variation in terms of the best example of leadership and then not so great examples of leadership. One of the high impact actions here is creating a leadership compact, which is about identifying the behaviors and expectations between national bodies and leaders, and between leaders and the people who are being led. We already have a developing people improving care framework, and so we want to build on that and make sure that more institutions going forward are assessed as good and outstanding on developing people improving care. But that compact is key, and again, a two-way conversation. What that also means is that some consequences for leaders then who are not actually adhering to the compact and behaviors, and that's the improvement in regulatory and oversight frameworks. Also competency frameworks for execs, non-execs and chairs, again to identify what are the consistent behaviors expected from leaders in the NHS. The next priority is addressing the nursing shortages, and Ruth is leading that, chairing that work stream, and she's here, the Chief Nursing Officer. And a couple of the high impact actions there include an attraction program and campaign to get young people interested in a career in nursing. And we're seeing some success with some of the work that Ruth and her team are leading. The other effort is on retention programs. Again, a lot of thinking and insight and evidence has gone into what are the actions that will keep people within the NHS and within nursing. And we want to roll that out after some successful pilots and examples wider in the service. Enhancing the number of clinical placements is another big focus for this work stream. While we know that nursing is one of the largest actually, profession in the NHS and has 40,000 vacancies, absolutely is the priority. We also know that there are other professions that need support as well. So for instance, how can we have more GPs joining and providing support in primary care? And let me just say that it is in some ways a number game, and you have the demand curve going like this and supply curve going like this, and how are we going to make the two come together? It won't only be supply, but supply is of course a key part of it, and supply has two elements, and Simon mentioned this earlier, which is there is something about retention. We do lose people at various transition points, whether it's during school and when we're talking about doctors, from school to foundation to core. At each of these transition points, we are losing people. We also have imbalances in terms of where doctors are going across the country. And there are some high impact actions being thought of, including how to have other multi-profession teams supporting general practice and primary care, international recruitment, as well as retention. So therefore, in the 21st century care, that demand curve, which is going like this, also needs to be addressed with multidisciplinary working models and releasing time to care, as well as technology and digitally enabled solutions. The last priority, but by no means least, is the new operating model for workforce. So as we have ICSs expanding across the country, what does that mean for where workforce issues are resolved and addressed? What are the things, a few topics that should be dealt with at a national level? What needs to happen at a regional level and then at a place-based level? With the NHS being the largest employer, not in Europe, so definitely in communities, it is an anchor employer. It is the key employer. And what does that mean for the ICS? And how can the workforce across health and social care be thought of in a different way? We have produced a workforce readiness tool that is currently being implemented across the ICSs, and that will give us a good idea of what the roadmap needs to be on workforce for place-based systems. And just the last slide, which is for each of these priorities, we do have outcomes that we're going to hold ourselves accountable to. And so I've just put a couple because there's a lot of data and modeling that goes behind these. So this is just a very headline flavor, and I'm happy to share more, but didn't have that much time in this session. So we have targets for retention rates and reduced vacancies, because ultimately it's about more and different, but definitely more. Higher levels of staff engagement from staff survey results. And let me quickly make a plug for staff survey. It's going to be coming out on the 7th of October. So please make sure that everybody in the NHS is responding. But definitely need to look at how people are feeling and what can we do to make sure that the bottom third in terms of staff engagement, those organizations are moving up in terms of how staff are feeling and being treated. Stronger pipeline of talented leaders at all levels, and more representation at senior levels from people from a BME background. A flexible workforce, and we do need to then see how it translates to better care for patients in each of the different settings that we work in. And when we heard about learning disability this morning and from Simon, but we are looking at what does that mean for providing care in the right setting. And then, joined up workforce policies so that we can make sure that the world's largest workforce strategy, writing it is the easy part, is actually delivered in the years to come. So thank you again for your interest, and I'm happy to continue the conversation offline. Thanks.
Many thanks for covering a quite extraordinary amount of ground there about the key issue occupying people's minds at the moment. So what I'd like to do now is invite Simon Stevens, David Roberts, Dido Harding, and Amanda Pritchard, the Chief Operating Officer, to join me on the platform. And this is an opportunity for you to ask some questions of the senior team, and we'll engage others as appropriate. So do please come up. Okay. So before I open it up, I'd just like to ask you a couple of questions just to get a feel for how the rest of the system is going to perceive the changes in terms of bringing NHS Improvement, NHS England together. So Amanda, I think on day 11 in your role. Could you just tell us what your role is and what your goal is?
Yes, thank you very much. It's also a wonderful surprise to be sitting up here, because I only found out that was going to happen about half an hour ago. I think...
Yes, sorry.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. So my role is a new role. It's the Chief Operating Officer for both NHS England and NHS Improvement. Carries also the kind of technical, I suppose, role as the NHS Improvement Chief Executive, but very much with a view to bringing together those two organisations with a practical focus on delivery of the long-term plan. Right. So my kind of current focus, really, apart from just finding out who everybody is and where the loos are, is to really think through how now we make sure that the national, regional and local structures are all pointing in the same direction, so that we do move in practice to feeling like one organisation on the ground, as well as at executive and board level.
Brilliant. And of course you know exactly what it's like at the sharp end, don't you, running guys in St Thomas's, so you know what good looks like and what you're trying to achieve.
Yes. I mean, I think one of the things that's really clear, certainly sitting where I do now, is how aligned everybody I've met is around really trying to make a difference for patients. And there is a contribution everybody can make to that agenda, whether they're sitting in Skipton House or in Quarry House, or indeed, right through to sitting at the front line. But that's the direction we've got to point in. In a sense, that's always the test, is what we're doing actually making a difference where it really matters. And I think that's hopefully something I can bring with some recent experience.
Great, thank you. So Simon, just continuing that theme, and I know you said earlier you need to sort of live the change you want to be. So what will people see in terms of the changes, but not least actually in the regional level that you've now introduced, in terms of the support and engagement they're going to get from the centre?
Well, I think it's as Amanda said, frankly, Richard, which is that, look, I joined the health service in 1988. And in 1989, a government proposition was put up that the health service should sort of be split in half between the people who do the planning and the funding versus the people who do the looking after the patients. And we've had that for ever since. And what we're really saying here is, actually, we want to reconnect the planning and the funding and the doing, and that's what using the jargon is sort of integration, but really it's joined up services, thinking about a population of people and how do we use all the levers and opportunities we've got to help people look after themselves and improve health. So if that's what we're trying to do, then actually having two separate organisations, a left hand and a right hand, regionally, nationally, doesn't really help with that. So we're actually bringing the left hand and the right hand together. And so to answer your question, what that will mean, hopefully, that will be the test, is that we've got a sort of single voice, a single set of relationships, a more mature way of having a discussion with folks about the improvements that they're bringing about, that emphasises, yes, the operational imperatives of the here and now, but also the bigger changes that are required, and emphasises, yes, the performance and the accountability that goes with that, but also the improvement help needed to genuinely unlock that energy. And so that's really the test. Single voice, a focus on improvement as well as accountability, and a focus on redesigning the system while nevertheless managing for today.
Great. Thank you. Now, we'd like to open it up to yourselves. So anyone would like to put a question or point to the executive team? And yes, please. There's a roving mic, please, just on the left there.
Hello. Hi there all. My question is, what is the board doing to ensure a just and safe culture in the context of scandals which take years for some patients and staff to get justice? This is in the context of staff who commit suicide. This is in the context of patients. Sorry if you can't hear me. Did you hear that? Mm-hmm. And this is in the context of protection for whistleblowers. For example, in the last year, experience of this with regard to the NHSI whistleblowing scheme not being continued for months. No action taken against directors in organisations. Directors who in NHS England tell me that they can't speak to whistleblowers, and I'm really sorry to raise it to you, but this is saving people's lives, this is saving staff's lives. So I just want to know, what is the board doing to ensure that there is a just and safe culture in the context of scandals which take years for patients and staff to get justice?
Dido, this is very much your area of work, isn't it? So perhaps you could...
I think I'm already mic'd.
Great.
Double mic'd. And thank you for your question. Obviously, we've met before. We do take these issues extremely seriously, and I know each of us do individually, but also collectively, the two boards, and feel our responsibility and accountability, both as a regulator, but also, as Simon has said, as a improvement function as well. And we have to look at both. There's an awful lot in the question that you posed, so I sort of pull out a couple of things. Actually, in this room earlier on today, I was on a panel talking about inclusive and compassionate leadership. And at the core of the culture change that the people plan is looking to create is embedding a compassionate and inclusive, fair and just culture. And that isn't going to happen overnight. We have pockets of complete brilliance of that in the NHS, but we certainly don't have consistent application at all. And we in NHSI and NHSE have to take the plank out of our own eye as well. We know that we have work to do on that as well. So Prerna has set out some of that work in the people plan, but very much at the heart of that leadership work stream is how we embed both what competencies we expect from our senior leaders, but also how we hold them to account and how we develop and coach them to meet those expectations. So that's some of the long-term work on leadership. You mentioned also whistleblowers and the whistleblower support scheme. You're right that both NHS England and NHS Improvement over the last 18 months, 2 years since I've been involved have piloted whistleblowing schemes. We are in the process of taking the feedback from those individuals who've been on those support schemes to make sure that when, and it isn't an if, it is a when, we roll out a permanent full-time whistleblower support scheme, that it genuinely meets the needs of those individuals. It's complex work, and it's important that we are listening and learning rather than rushing, but I wouldn't want you to think that the pause is anything other than a desire to make sure that we get the scheme right. You want to come back?
Please do, yes.
Yes.
So much for letting me speak. I really do appreciate the works in progress to move this whistleblower scheme along, but people have been waiting for months now, and there's people that I'm really worried about in terms of things. And, we are sitting here and you people could do anything. And, we have a duty to look after our staff, and it's about, and I was at that session earlier on, and it was really good to talk about inclusiveness and compassionate leadership, but it's about safe environments for staff. And that's what we all want. We want just and safe culture where we can all feel safe looking after our patients and feeling proud to be in the NHS.
I couldn't agree with you more, and you put it very, very well indeed. One other element that Prerna didn't reference but is an important part of the leadership work stream is we've been asked specifically by the government to look at the CARC review into the fit and proper person test. And to look at the recommendations, and we will be reporting back as part of the full people plan with firm recommendations, having engaged and consulted very broadly around the sector on what form of professional regulation we should have to take another theme that you mentioned of where we should be holding managers and leaders to account for their actions as part of making sure that we do have a just and fair culture.
Do you have a timescale on when that review might?
Well, it will be part of
to
the people plan.
Right.
We had committed to publish a people plan within 2 months of a comprehensive spending review. I would expect, and there's a lot of things happening in the world over the course of the next couple of months, which I suspect the exact publication date will not be a function of our ability to write the plan.
Right.
And we are working really hard to get that plan finished very quickly, and I'd very much hope that it will be published before Christmas, but that is going to be well above my pay grade.
Thank you for your question, and it's worth noting actually this is not the first time that whistleblowing has been raised at the AGM, so thank you for your question. Yes, please.
Brad McInerney, just volunteer in the community. Dido, and if David was here, I'd really thank David as well for your inspiration and your leadership that you show, both in terms of your words and your actions, and I've seen that at the national and the local level really, and also on the inspiration side of things I'd carry that over to Prerna as well really. I had a chat with her today, and absolutely phenomenal person. So my question is around health inequalities. So I think it's great, Simon, that we've allocated some money down to that. That's good. I think we need to go beyond money, though. We need to look at resources, which includes money. But it's what it really means then at that local micro community neighbourhood level. And I just want to share with you, because it was heartbreaking, but I think it's important to put it into context and reality at that community neighbourhood level. I was privileged to go to a show where 15 children, 3 to 14, were dancing, and it was just phenomenal, really. I went back then to see the children, the teacher, and what I didn't realise that those children were dancing with black socks because they couldn't afford DAPs. They wanted to really showcase it by going and getting £1.50 shoulder bags, string bags. They couldn't afford that. I wouldn't get onto the black caps and go into competitions as well, really. They couldn't even afford to actually have their group's logo on the front of the T-shirts they got from Primarks for £1.99. So I think when we talk about health inequalities, we really need to do that sense checking at the local level. And what I see is it being a lot more explicit than it was before, and that's the balance between, congratulating them. What I don't see is I don't see a plan for it. I see it within the NHS long-term plan, and I might have missed it elsewhere. But if I were to go and to ask my local integrated care system, show me your plan for tackling health inequalities.
Okay.
I'm not sure I'd see it. So I think there's something nationally and locally around that.
Thank you. Simon, I seem to remember your speech at the Royal College of Medicine, if I recall correctly, that you started to, you were addressing some of these issues about the health service having a more nuanced understanding of health inequalities, both in terms of predicting future demand, but also in terms of actually helping address them, working with other parts of the public sector and wider community. So in that sort of context, what's your sort of response to those health inequality issues?
I think what Brent says is right, to be frank about it. And what we've said, the presentation that Matt gave a bit earlier about how every part of the country is now working out how to make a reality of the improvements that are in the long-term plan. An explicit part of that has got to be answering your question, Brent, which is what are you going to be doing that is going to be the health services contribution to cutting health inequalities? We recognise that there's a lot of things that impact on health and well-being that aren't in the control of the NHS, absolutely, but the fact is that a lot of what we do can also have an impact, and we see differences in the access to early diagnosis and treatment on the part of BME patient groups, on the part of people with learning disabilities, on the part of low-income communities. So we know, this is a very well-researched area, actually, in this country. The question is not, do we know where the gaps are? The question is, how are we going to change the NHS delivery system to proactively do something about it? And that's one of the things I was talking about a bit earlier this afternoon, actually. So that's going to be, part of our test of whether these local implementation plans are real. But we've also, as I say, got to stand shoulder to shoulder with communities and with local government leaders. And so tomorrow here, I will be with Andy Burnham, the Mayor of Greater Manchester. We're going to be talking about climate change and clean air, in fact, because it turns out that, of course, the determinants of health are affected by many other things, whether it's transport, infrastructure, schools, a lot of the work that's going on across Greater Manchester. And we see that in many different communities, and we've got to stand up and play our part. I saw this personally going back again. My first job in the NHS was in Consett, County Durham, an old steel town where the steelworks are shut. The hospital was the biggest employer, and we were the anchor institution. It was definitely an NHS kind of the people, by the people, for the people, playing our part. And that actually is the lived experience of a lot of people working across the NHS in every part of England.
Thank you. Probably got time for just one more question. Yes, please, gentleman there. If you could make it succinct, that would be much appreciated. Thank you.
I will. My name's Luke Redman. I'm a CIO in London, Chief Information Officer in London, and not to compete for any longevity. I started in the NHS in 1977, training as a radiographer, and I've been through a number of careers, and I'm very privileged, I think, to have succeeded. But the digital world is quite turbulent, I would say, and it would be great to hear from the panel your continued support that every organisation in health and care gets to a minimum standard over the next few years for digital capability, and that every member of the public, every person who wants it in England, can have access to their full record so they can manage their own care effectively. It'd just be great to hear that reinforced from you today. Thank you.
David, that's something you'd like.
So thank you, Luke. I think the reality of the world we're living in, I come from financial services, that's my background. It's absolutely clear that if we're to remain relevant, then we have to meet the aspirations digitally of our consumers and our patients and our populations, because actually that's what they're living in their everyday lives. And so from a sort of a consumer and patient perspective, a population perspective, we have to get to a level of capability across the whole NHS, because people will not stand for some of the processes, some of the lack of information flows, from the challenges that they see in their everyday care. At the same time, we know from an efficiency perspective that we have to get to a level of integration of systems of data, of platforms that can transform the way in which we do things. So I think on multiple dimensions, and then from a security and data privacy perspective, we also have to recognise that some of our systems are not where they need to be, and we have to invest in order to build them. So I think there are multiple dimensions, and that can only work when it's consistent across the NHS. It can't be individual exemplars just on their own. It has to be a range across the piece. So I think from the board's perspective, and Noel Gordon's here as the chair of NHS Digital, one of the big provider, we absolutely have a commitment at the board level, backed by serious investment, to lift the standards across the whole of the NHS so that we are digitally relevant, whilst also recognising there are a substantive proportion of people in this country for whom that's not relevant, so we have to offer both. We can't just bet everything on digital is the answer, because actually there are people for whom that doesn't work, and therefore we need to keep our flexibility. But fundamentally, if you're looking for commitment, you have it.
Can I thank you for your questions, thank the panel for their contributions, and invite Dido and David to bring us formally to a close.
Closed.
Closed.
Thank you.
I think we should just thank you, Richard, for comparing.
Indeed.
Thank you very much. Cheers.